Good morning. Yes, it's Friday. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion. And again, what a really wild ride we were on again yesterday. We start off with the opening bell, actually, in the pre-market, down about 300 on the Dow, looking like we were down about 250 points on the NASDAQ. We actually get into the trading session. We're down almost 350 points on the Dow. You look over a little bit of a recovery in the NASDAQ, still down over 200 points. By the end of the day, rallied back at least off of those lows and actually finishing off still significant, about 140 points on the NASDAQ, about 130 points on the Dow. So did we recover? Absolutely. People were looking for opportunities, maybe the overselling sense that people were getting yesterday because the pressure, as I say, was on early. We had a big spike in volatility. As a matter of fact, you look over at the VIX. VIX actually pushed up towards that 29 level. We actually finished down and settled back down into that 26 level, 26 and a half. So volatility was trading and moving in a very tight, contracted sort of a way to the downside. We've had a little bit of spiking this week, a little bit of volatility coming back in with some raising of that volatility index. But by the end of the day, starting to see it just come right back down to where it initially was. So call it 25, 26. That's where we've been. The pressure was on the NASDAQ all day long. What was really getting pressured? Well, look over at technology. You look at technology, that down about 2%. You look at the semiconductors down over 2%. And then take a look over at biotech, which was under pressure as well. And that's been something that's been a pretty interesting performer. Far more days, it seems, recently where that biotech index has been up, despite the fact that you're seeing other selling in technology itself. So final hour of the day really was the changing part of the day. And we talk about this all the time. The final 90 minutes, oftentimes the final hour, sometimes even the final 30 minutes, we can have some pretty major lifts, but we did, or movement. We did have a nice lift yesterday, actually. Look over at the NASDAQ, only finishing down 140. I say only because, as I said earlier, we were down 250 points in the pre-market. So that was a huge recovery based upon where we were. What was really getting pressured? Tesla, eBay, PayPal, Netflix, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, you name it. A lot of the names that have been outperforming, definitely under some of the pressure, that really pulling markets down a little bit. Now, chips did rally towards the end part of the day to nearly flat. So yeah, they were down. I talked about the chips being down over 2%. They were down, but rallied all the way back. As a matter of fact, that's been a bit of a trend where the chips have been pretty resilient, and that's something to keep an eye on as well. Got a late surge out of some of the technology stocks as well, only finishing down about 0.8%. So we did see a lot of volume based on all of that movement that I was just describing. So we were talking about the tech was down over 2%. The chips were down over 2.5%. And then suddenly we come back and actually finish off of those numbers, cut those numbers basically in half, and then a pretty decent recovery really off of that pressure selling. Now, talk about volume all the time. Another big volume day yesterday. And what were some of the leaders? Well, we had Apple, 2.5 million contracts. Tesla, almost 1.5 million contracts. GE, about 630,000 contracts. And then over 325,000 contracts trading. AMD, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and Vale. That's a lot of contracts. That's a nice big swath of how much of the day we're talking about. Volumes have been very strong. I've talked about volumes getting very close to being right around that 30 million. It seems like each and every day, either up or down from that level, but very, very close to that level each and every day. We did have some pullbacks earlier in the week. We were a little bit less volume, and then we bounced right back again. So these volumes continue to be very strong. What area stood out most for me yesterday? Because I think it's always very important to see what was really happening yesterday to kind of set you up for into today. What stood out yesterday? Materials. Now, we had a chance to talk about this yesterday. I was on the halftime report with Wapner and the gang, and he actually asked me, he said, "Hey, Pete, I see that you really added a lot in certain areas." And I already had big exposure, but the materials space just continues to hit day after day after day. Give you a little example of just yesterday alone. Unusual option activity, letter X, U.S. Steel, Vale, Freeport-McMoran, Metal, MT, Mosaic. Now that's a little bit different, but Mosaic, it's in that category of materials, so we'll throw it in there. All of which were hitting with some very, very active paper, looking for upside in every single case, looking on a bullish side. We've talked about the XME as well. That was up about 7% over the last week. It doesn't get talked about a lot, the metals and mining index, But it's something where we had unusual activity a while ago. I actually bought some calls in there as well because of that. So my exposure is not just in the individual names, but also I've got that ETF exposure there as well. Crude, pretty decent day, actually finishing up near that 41 level. We were just talking about crude in the 37s. So we've gone from 42, 43. That swift drop to the downside just seemed like every single day cascading back down and got down to 37. Here we are once again back up towards 41. So very interesting moves. And keep an eye on gold, keep an eye on silver. They've been fluctuating around as well. So we've been watching that very, very closely. It looked like gold somewhere, getting closer towards that 1950 level. Is it going to be able to get back up towards 2000? We'll see. We had a really interesting pre-market. The NASDAQ looked like it was moving pretty strong to the upside, up about 75 points. We get into the trading day today, and we weren't really seeing as much follow-through. As a matter of fact, I just took a glance as we're sitting here. We are 1 hour into the trading session. As I say, in the pre-market, we looked like we were going to be up about 0.6%. Right now, we're actually a little bit closer to flat and actually in the red right now, down about 11 points in the NASDAQ. So that has turned fairly rapidly. Now, all kinds of news overnight, and people are talking about TikTok, they're talking about Oracle, they're talking about Walmart, talking about all kinds of different things, and the unemployment claims, which were underneath 1 million once again. So there's all kinds of different news coming from all different places. And so the reaction of the markets is somewhat stunning, I would say. Right now, the Dow is up 10 points. NASDAQ down 20 points. S&P down 5 points. My point is, when you look at these moves, they've been all over the place, up and down and everything. But right now, almost all of these have returned back very, very close to the closing prices levels of yesterday. So even though we see this volatility, and we talk about this all the time, this intraday type volatility, if you just look from where we were at the open to where we are now, there is some very, very volatile movement going on. Volatility index, as a matter of fact, right now, trading right around 26. We talked about it's been moving closer and holding closer to that 25, 26 level for the volatility index. So what are some of the leaders today in terms of the Dow of what we're seeing right now? We have Coke, we have Salesforce, we have Nike. They're all been in positive territory since the opening, but we've had some pretty interesting drags on the Dow as well. So while we're getting pulled to the downside a little bit earlier in the Dow, you got Home Depot, you've got Dow, you've got Chevron. We talked about energy, we talked about oil. Chevron, a little bit of a pullback. But the other area that just seems to not be able to ever put these back to back, you hear me talk about it all the time, but I think it's very important to always keep an eye on the financials. JP Morgan, we talk about that $100 level. It just has such a difficult time sustaining anything over that. Well, today, JP Morgan, last I looked, trading right around the 97 level. So that's been off and not trading. It was just over 100 just a few trading sessions ago. Now you look at Goldman Sachs, also under pressure. So you're seeing a little bit more pressure coming on some of the banks. That's been something that's not unusual. We've been talking about the XLF. It's somewhere near 25, but could it be 50 cents below or 50 cents above? Absolutely. But 25 seems to be that magnet area, at least for the time being. It's been that magnet area for the big financials. So we did have some strength early on in the NASDAQ when we were in a much stronger positive territory. A lot of that coming from Tesla. We had PayPal, we had Micron, we had KLAC 10 Core, we had Zebra Technologies, all kinds of different tech type names that we're participating. Apple, Facebook, Amazon, throw in Netflix as well. All we're participating to the upside. I'm watching it slide a little bit more. It's hard to get out of the corner of my eye. A little bit more. We're sliding in the NASDAQ, now down about 25 points on the NASDAQ. Nothing big, but sliding for sure. And if you check it all out, last I looked, the technology, the XLK, that was pretty close to flat. That's probably moved a little bit down to the downside. SMH, flat. That's probably also moved a little bit to the downside. Biotech, I keep mentioning that. Biotech, up about 1%. So we've got some strength. It continues to be around the biotech space. And you look at the XBI, that's been the one that I've been watching the closest. And it's been very, very interesting to watch as they've made some moves, even on days where you're watching the NASDAQ getting pulled to the downside. There are days where we've watched the biotech index remain in the positive territory. Now, there's been some pullbacks as well, but something just to keep an eye on. And I don't think it's talked about nearly enough in terms of what's been working most consistently. And we've had a little bit of consistency also in some of the industrial names as well. But today, a little bit of pressure on that. So I talked earlier, we always have to give it an unusual as we get into the end of the take. So here we go. Yesterday, materials really stood out, right? We talked about all this activity in the material space. Vale, this is another name. And as a matter of fact, it was my final trade yesterday on the halftime report. But you take a look at this name. 1180 is where the stock was trading. We had a buyer of 17,000 of the October 14 calls. Now, what makes this interesting was just a week ago, they were buying the October 13 calls in Vale. Matter of fact, yesterday, they were also buying calls in Vale. Now, I talked about all of that activity across the board, that unusual activity in the materials space. I'll read them off again to you. You had U.S. Steel, Vale, Freeport-McMoRan, ArcelorMittal, and I even threw in Mosaic as well. Now, it's interesting to see this pattern where we're seeing materials, and that just continues to be a drumbeat that's getting pounded upon. So just keep an eye on that. Now, keep an eye on these markets. We know that there's going to be some volatile moves throughout. It's Friday, so that sometimes can make it a little bit more interesting. I'm showing the VIX right now. Full update. Trading about 26 and a quarter. I've got the Dow down 20. I got the NASDAQ down 30. The S&P down about 8 points right now. It's going to be another one of these wild ride days, but we've already had some movement in the first hour or so. We'll see if that can continue. And I kind of feel like we're going to probably see a little bit of continuance on that. And let's not forget, we've got options expiration, which is always a bigger day as well. So keep an eye on that. There's a lot of different activity, a lot of these September options that are going to be expiring today. That's something to keep an eye on as well. Folks, knowledge is king. You got to have the knowledge. Our guys at Market Rebellion, the best educators in the business. No doubt in my mind about that. You've got to get educated. This is the place for growth. This is the place where you can learn, and this is the place where you can reduce your risk and give yourself an opportunity for success. Nothing guaranteed, but you absolutely have a much better opportunity for success if you're educated and you understand in the derivatives world and where the volumes are. And on top of that, where's the growth? That's the most important part. Folks, have a great day of trading.